Animals fans, and welcome back to the Animals universe. We're doing AniLysis number 98 today, so close to a century of AniLysis. Not in years, in number. And today we're looking at Axe's Scoop. So what is Axe's Scoop? Well, for any Animals fans out there, you know what a scoop is. It is effectively an Andalite dwelling. And they don't live in houses like us, they live in what is basically sheltered holes in the ground. You know, very fancy stuff. The sort of place you'd expect Bill Gates to be hanging out. Axe is introduced to us in book 4, back in the message. But it's not until book 28, a full 24 books later. Yes, I can do maths. A full 24 books later, where we're first introduced to the concept of his scoop. And here's what it's introduced as, and what it looks like. The others, Prince Jake, Cassie, Rachel and Marco, all have homes and families. Only Tobias and I do not. Tobias lives in a meadow that is his territory, and I, until recently, did not even have that limited amount to call my own. But now I have made my life a bit more comfortable. I have constructed a sort of scoop, what we Andalites consider to be a home. Like any scoop, it is mostly open, with only a small area covered by a semi-spherical roof. And in my case, the scoop had to be very small, so that I could fold the roof down and erase all visual evidence of it. I had only a few things in the scoop: a world almanac that my friends had given me, a photograph of a delicious cinnamon bun, some human clothing, and one other thing, only recently acquired. One very important other thing that has changed my life: a television. I folded my scoop down so that nothing, including the TV, would be visible. Not even to a human walking directly over the spot. We're not sure exactly when this was constructed, but say it's introduced in book 28, I would suspect it was probably being built in the last couple of books, I'd say, because it wouldn't take long. I'd imagine that, I mean, this is Ghost of Essam's interpretation, but it's down here. It's like a bivvy. If you've ever been in the military, or I'm not sure if the Americans call them bivvies as well, but it's certainly in the British military. A bivvy is basically a sheet that is held up by sticks and at the sides strung to the ground. So it is just literally a roof over your head. And that's what I'm sort of picturing it as here. And Ghost of Essam has, as requested, done the cover, the sheet, to be of a similar colour to the grass. Because the thing about Axe is, he's down on Earth on his own, and he can't be seen. So he has to be totally secretive, which is why in those quotes he said he needed it to be small enough that it could just sort of fold and be put away. So that a person walking basically over the top of it wouldn't know it's anything special. So something green coloured, the shelter, that's quite small. It's in a dip. So we've got a dip in the ground, like a natural dip. And he just sort of hunkers down in there with the shelter over the top. And then there's a big open part in this dip, and he can just step out into the field. He's got the TV in there. He's got a world almanac, which, so far as I know, is basically like an encyclopedia. Basically a big book. A batch of human clothing, which has got to be, you know, in need of a wash after a short amount of time. And a photograph of a cinnamon bun in a picture frame. So he must have like a set of drawers. He doesn't mention that, but if you've got clothing and a photo frame, you're not going to put the photo frame on the floor, surely, unless he's proper wild in it. But also, what happens if it rains? I can't imagine that this has got sealed sides. The shelter probably doesn't seal at the bottom. So he would need some sort of container or something to lift everything off the ground. Maybe he's just got like a table, a really rubbish table that one of the animals snuck over one day. And he just plots his human clothes and this picture of a cinnamon bun and the almanac on top of that. He must have something like that. A set of drawers or a table, just something to keep everything dry. And then maybe even something to put the television on as well. Because he has the television, and he watches a lot of television. Later on down the line, he adds to the contents of his scoop, but at this stage, where it's basically just recently been constructed, that is the extent to which it is a thing. For it to be easily put away, it's got to be, you know, your regular fabric. It can't be held up by much. It can't be stapled to the ground or anything like that. So it's got to be like completely portable. And I imagine with this dip in the ground, he has the TV right at the bottom of this dip, like at the back, and he just brings the shelter down. Or maybe he moves it into the woods nearby, and we'll get into location and that sort of stuff in a bit. But there must be a way for him to have all this stuff just like buried in this hole, and then the sheet going over it so that it almost levels it out. That's what I suspect is going on here. But yeah, let's talk about location, because Ghost of Essam has put the scoop alongside this wall of trees going around the side there, on the edge of this little field. And I asked for him specifically to do that. Why? Well, let's start looking at the quotes for the location of Axe's scoop. I flew to the scoop. I took a longer route this time, bypassing the new housing development. Soared over fields and pastures and circled back to Axe's clearing in the woods. Wings rustled above me. Tobias was gliding in for a landing, his talons clutching a black plastic rectangle. He released it as he swept his wings forward to clutch the nearest branch. Nothing like the joys of daytime TV, huh? Marco said, stomping up through the underbrush. Our buddy Axe here is a star, I said brightly, brushing dried out pine needles off my bike shorts, wincing when a sharp stone bit into my tender human foot. We can't leave him in the barn, Jake pointed out. Cassie's dad comes in here all the time. Maybe we could fix up some kind of extra shelter around his scoop, Tobias suggested. I shook my head. Too damp in that field, I said. Axe hesitated, turned his main stalk eyes to look behind him, toward the deeper woods. Axe climbed the steep rise of the hill near his scoop, and I hitched a ride on a fading thermal. It was dusk. The sun was enormous on the horizon, about to disappear. Vibrant orange and purple warmed the forest. I landed on a low branch in a clearing on the hilltop. We have conflicting reports about the location of Axe's scoop, but do remember that this thing is portable, so far as we know. But the quotes that we've got there don't say anything about his scoop moving to different locations, and indeed the information about locations it does give are relatively varied. So one of those quotes specifically mentioned that his scoop is in a field. Tobias says, why don't we put an extra shelter around his scoop? To which Cassie replies, it gets too damp in that field. What is a field? It is an open area, typically with grass in it, no trees or buildings above it, but it's usually surrounded by hedges or fences or whatever have you. So that would put Axe's scoop, like in Essam's picture here, in a field. But pretty much every other example says that there are trees around. So Tobias will land in a tree, on a tree branch. Marco appears or comes from the underbrush, which is basically what you get beneath trees in woodland. And there's various other bits in that series of quotes there that implicated the trees. Well, what can we make of that? So when I asked Ghost of Essam to design this, I said, do the scoop on the very edge of a field with a border of trees hanging over the top. One of those quotes did say that Axe's scoop was in the woodlands in a clearing. So what we've got here is, this is all woodland surrounding this area, but there's just a little clear patch in the middle, and that's where Axe's scoop is located. So there's no prying eyes. It's not like this field is just open and you see the town from there, or can you? We'll get onto that in just a second. But yeah, it's surrounded by trees, but also Axe, being the claustrophobic Andalite that he is, wants to have the open skies above him, so it's just sort of on the edge of the woodland here. And I think that makes sense. That sort of joins all these quotes so that they all sort of make sense with each other. We also know that from that last quote that there is a hill nearby that Axe can climb and whatever have you. But that's a bit more trivial. So yeah, I think this picture that Essam's done is an accurate representation of what I see, judging from all the quotes we get about Axe's scoop location. Hello, Tobias. Axe stood in the open part of the scoop, his stalk eye scanning the sky. I am glad you came. We were preparing to find you. Already? You found the site? Complete no-brainer. Marco was hunkered down in front of the computer at the back of the scoop. This quote here, it was difficult to place. But judging from everything we've discussed so far, Axe is standing in the open part of his scoop looking up at the sky. If you're stood in woodlands, you're not going to get a very good clear picture of a sky there, so more evidence that actually where the scoop is placed, it's in an open area. Okay? There's also a bit there where we realise that a computer that Axe later gets down the line is placed at the back of the scoop, right at the back, so sort of where the TV is here in this picture. Not that you can see it very clearly, I'm sure. So we've looked at the general geography of the area from what we can gather, you know, surrounded by pine trees in a field. But where is it in relation to everything else we've discussed in previous AniLysis? After dark that night, I ran into the open fields to feed. The night was black. Even the lights from the neighbourhood, where the others lived, seemed dim. Below me, Marco and Axe slipped into the little strip of woods that led from the barn to Axe's scoop. I knew they'd soon be logging on to their souped-up Mac, hacking into blood bank computers. It's described as there being a strip of woods, or woodland, between Cassie's barn and Axe's scoop. Now, I was going to do a big town map for this bit, but I needed a bit more time to work on a town map. But I will eventually get around to doing that, and we'll position Axe's scoop there. But just so we cover it, Cassie's barn is sort of on the north side of town, sort of western, pointing up towards the mountains, which, as we've discussed, are northwest of the town. Between the mountains and Cassie's barn is basically woodlands, woods, forest, deep forest, and that is where this will be. So somewhere just sort of north of Cassie's barn, after a patch of this forest and this woodland, that is where I'm suspecting the clearing where Axe's scoop is. Okay, we don't know relative distance, but we could have a good idea. And why do I say that? Well, because what you heard in the first quote there was that Axe, from his scoop, went to the nearby open fields, which you might say, well, I thought he was in an open field. Well, remember, this is just a clearing. You know, you're not going to have much space to run in a clearing. He's probably gone from the clearing through this patch of woodland that we're talking about, and gone to these open fields. And he says he can see the lights of the neighbourhood from there. So that puts us within a few miles, I would say, of the Animos hometown. But there's even more of a clue of how proximate Axe's scoop is to the town, and that is the fact that he morphs human in the scoop to walk to the mall. I would have to morph my human form to go into the town. Every morph is a surprise. The last time I morphed to human, my own more or less humanoid parts, my head and arms, changed last. This time they were first. I walked with Marco out of the woods, across the farthest fields of Cassie's farm and toward the mall. It took a long time. Humans walk very slowly, a result of having only 2 legs and no tail. We crossed the fields and then walked along a street, a path for cars. He really cannot be that far, because he morphed to human there, at his scoop, and then walked, not ran, not jogged, specifically walked, and he mentioned how slow it was. He walked from there all the way to the mall. Remember that they have 2 hours, and humans, I've checked, on average walk about 3 miles an hour. So obviously he's going to get to the mall and do something, but let's just say, for sake of argument, that he got to the mall and immediately remorphed in some bathroom somewhere. So let's say it takes him 2 hours to walk from his scoop to the mall. That would mean it's no more than 6 miles away. And that's not including the distance to just Cassie's barn, which he has to walk past. My speculation is that it's about 2 miles from Cassie's barn to the scoop. So a fair distance. You know, people aren't just going to casually walk to this spot. You know, you might get some hikers that will walk past it, but the further you get away from society, the less likely you are to hit a specific point. You know, it's like exponential or something. So, and that means that he can see the lights probably over the tree line. So yeah, he can still see the lights if he's a couple of miles away, but it also doesn't take him long, especially when he's in his own body, to run to Cassie's barn. So I reckon, 2 miles is probably a reasonable expectation for how far his scoop is from Cassie's barn. I think that's about it for geography and location. There's not much more we can really go into without just complete speculation. So let's look at the contents. We've already sort of covered the contents from Book 28, The Experiment, but I just want to have a bit more of an in-depth look at what is in Axe's scoop. Tobias, too, enjoys TV. He comes every day to watch a show with me. It is called The Young and the Restless. It is very educational, though I remain confused as to the cause of so much restlessness. TV allows me to observe much more human behaviour than I see in them all. I'm still wondering why humans put their mouths together, and why they seem to enjoy it. My first thought was that they were transferring food, but that seems not to be the case. I picked it up. Grey buttons in the shapes of numbers and arrows covered one side. What is it? It's a universal TV remote. I spotted it in a dumpster. Tobias cocked his sleek head at me. How did you get so many channels? I could swear I saw MTV and CNN just now. But you don't have cable, so... I glanced up from the TV set. Phoebe was playing her guitar at Central Perk. I made improvements. You made a satellite dish out of a broken radio, 2 old soda cans, and... What is this? He held a piece of thick black wire in his beak. The wire that humans hang from limbless trees. Very convenient. I found it this evening before I fed. Tobias quickly dropped it. Ah, that would explain the power outage in Jake's neighbourhood. Axe tapes everything, Tobias explained. On every channel. You set up a CD-ROM thing to the VCR, or something like that. Anyway, it works. Marco, I believe this is what you are looking for. Axe stepped back from his small pile of equipment. With a remote, he fast-forwarded through the 30-minute show until he reached the segment. So at first, Axe is basically... He's got his TV, and a lot of his scoop revolves around it. So, he pulled an electric cable from a pole, somehow, down, and used that to connect up his antennae to get cable TV. So he's got cable TV in there, and he also used an old radio and soda cans and all that sort of stuff. So a little, very DIY, basically, very makeshift. But yeah, that's a reason that Jake's neighbourhood had a power outage. That also means that probably Jake's neighbourhood is closer to Axe's scoop than maybe other neighbourhoods. So Jake's neighbourhood is close to the outskirts, close to Cassie's barn. Yeah. So more information for our eventual town map. He then gets some form of CD-ROM drive and a VCR for his television, and he starts connecting it all up. He's got a TV remote, which Tobias gives him. So he basically just sits in front of the TV all evening, I imagine. Being a right nerd. He probably puts Star Trek on and nerds out to it. Nerd! And that seems to be just the way it is for Axe in his scoop. You know, he sits there hacking into TV stuff and figuring out how to rewind live TV before it actually became a thing. So well done, Axe. And then things change because Book 45, Marco has to go into hiding. And where does he go? He goes to Axe's scoop. He moves in, sort of. He sort of bounces around between the Chi Park, the Hortbridge Valley, and Axe's scoop. But basically, all of his stuff moves to Axe's scoop. Let's have a look at some quotes. Axe built his scoop soon after he came to Earth. According to him, it was a smaller version of a typical Andalite home. He had to do some remodelling when Marco took up part-time residence with him. Now the scoop was bigger, with a little more enclosed space and a lot more clutter. Axe was an alien of few possessions. Some research-type books, pictures of his favourite human foods, some computer equipment, his beloved television set. But Marco was a boy with lots of toys, and he kept a lot of them at the scoop. I glanced at his CD player, satellite dish, and assorted Game Boy cartridges. At the stacks of CDs and the piles of comic books, all of which he'd somehow mysteriously acquired after having to abandon his old stuff. He, Tobias and I were relaxing in my scoop the morning following the disaster at the beach. My advanced technical ability had provided me with a full variety of cable packages, free of charge. Marco was in possession of the wonderful invention Tobias had found for me, a remote. Freaking nothing on! Hundreds of stations and nothing worth watching. Marco, Tobias sat perched on the arm of a chair Marco had dragged to the scoop from what he described as some dump. Marco basically fills Axe's scoop with a load of his stuff. One thing that is mentioned here is that Marco had abandoned his old stuff, but there's curiosity how he got a hold of CD players, CDs, comic books, big piles of all this stuff. And maybe he went back and got it from his home. But I think what the sentence is trying to imply is that Marco got it from somewhere else, which would probably mean he stole it, which raises a lot of questions about what things have been said in the past about taking things using their powers. But that's a story for another day. Remember the whole David thing, guys? Your hypocrisy is showing through again. It's at this point in these quotes, by the way, that we also realise that Axe has basically gotten himself a computer at this stage. So somewhere down the line he got that, and for clarification, we know what type of computer it is. With the aid of Cassie's cell phone and my new lime green iMac, I proceeded to reroute the Yerk Z-Space transmissions through the NSA's central computer. Axe has got a lime green iMac. Okay, so it's one of these buggers apparently. Hold on, let's get a clearer picture. Here we are. So, yeah, apparently Axe has got that thing. But this all gets added toward the end of the series, along with Marco stuff, so he's got Game Boys in there and stuff like that. And it does become very cluttered, and it has to reorganise and get a bit bigger to accommodate Marco and all that sort of stuff. There's also a chair that apparently he dragged there, and if we're assuming it is 2 miles through woodland, I'm wondering how he brought a big chair in there. But let's face it, he probably took it to Cassie's barn, and then, hey Lila, and then morphed gorilla and carried it part of the way and got it there. So there is one other item. Are you coming up or what? Come on, good girl. There is one other item that may have been in Axe's scoop, and it's the beanbag. I threw myself down into the beanbag chair Marco had dragged to Axe's scoop when he realised he was going to be spending a lot more time there from now on. Why do I say that this might have been there? Well, Marco had already dragged a chair with chair arms from some dump, who knows where that is, dragged that there, and then in the return book 48, Rachel says that Marco, when he found out he was moving to Axe's scoop, had dragged a beanbag to Axe's scoop. And we have to remember that this part is a dream. And you know what happens in dreams? Sometimes things get misremembered or things are in the wrong places. So I'm suspecting that this beanbag in Axe's scoop during Rachel's dream doesn't actually exist. It's Rachel's imagining of the chair that Marco actually dragged down there. So I'm suspecting that this beanbag never actually existed. It was a figment of Rachel's imagination. So I think that covers everything really. We now just have to look at plot and the chronological happenings regarding Axe's scoop. And it never actually becomes relevant until book 40, the other. Not that that book was at all relevant in and of itself, but at least something happened at the scoop during the course of that particular plot. Hey Lila Lou. Tobias turned his incredibly intense hawk eyes on us. Kids, I think we've just discovered another Andalite. Axe pulled his shoulders back. Is it? It's not Estrid. Sorry, Axe. Not Arbat either. Alrighty then. Who? This guy's new, and he's got one real obvious distinguishing feature. He's only got half a tail. So since book 28, Axe has been working on his TV to make it super high spec and futuristic. And book 40 is where it first becomes useful. So they use it to rewind live TV to see the moment an Andalite was on television. Because Marco had seen it back at home, he goes to Tobias and Axe and says, what the hell is going on here? And Axe is able to use his remote control and his super duper TV to rewind live TV and see exactly what happened on the screen. At which point they find that it's not Estrid or anything like that, or Vista 3 or Axe. It's a new Andalite, and that's where the whole Gefinland and Myrtle thing starts off. But that book was entirely irrelevant, so let's just move on. Why are you so lovey-dovey today? Is it because Mummy's at work? You're lonely. You sit with me for a bit, but we have to do AniLysis. Okay, we have to do AniLysis. Let's get some quotes from book 45, shall we? Book 45 is where Marco has to fake his own death and his father's death because the Yeerks are after his dad. And so that is when Marco's dad finds out about the whole Animos thing, and he starts to help Axe create a Z-space transponder. Axe had been sifting interplanetary chatter for hours, and for hours we'd been gathered with him, all of us, in Axe's scoop. We'd come for the unveiling of the Z-space transponder. Dad hadn't mentioned it was still under construction. So it doesn't even translate? Rachel said impatiently. What does it do? Axe stopped working and looked at us with his main eyes. He put a delicate hand on either side of the device. It was fairly small, mini cooler size. The transmission capacity is not yet enabled, neither is the translator, but this device can monitor unscrambled Yeerk communications, which I've been doing for some time now. This is also the same time, of course, that Marco decides he has to live with Axe in his scoop, at least for a little bit, and the book gives us a clear reason why. Cheeland wasn't so bad. That's where I stayed now, mostly. They had TV. They had Oreos. When I needed a cable fix, I spent the night at Axe's scoop. It was too risky for me to be at Cassie's or Rachel's or Jake's. So yeah, a lot happens with Axe's scoop in book 45. It's where it becomes a lot more relevant to the series, so it's been just sort of building over time. Sort of like the Hork-Bajir colony, really. It sort of just goes on in the background, and then when it becomes time, it's like, this is important now. And in this book, it's important for the two reasons. One is for the Z-Space transponder, so Axe and Marcus' dad have been working on this thing, and that does become relevant, but they're at the stage of making it now, fixing it up and getting it ready. And they do that at Axe's scoop. And the second part is that although Marco could quite easily live with the Chi, they don't have cable. So when Marco wants cable, he goes to Axe's scoop. And then, from the quote we saw earlier, complains that there's never anything on anyway. So poor old Axe has to live with Marco while he complains about nothing being on the TV. That must be... Well, to be honest, Marco probably finds it annoying living with Axe as well. That's probably why he doesn't live there permanently, because they probably don't get along too well if made to live in the same place, because Axe wouldn't get any of his jokes, and Marco would just sit there complaining about what's on the television. So yeah, I don't think they'd be the best of roommates. Hence why Marco is getting constantly hoisted elsewhere. The Hork-Bajir are like, nah, we had enough of you, go back to Cheeland. The Chi are like, go stay with Axe. And Axe is like, why don't you go annoy the Hork-Bajir or something? And it's just this constant non-love triangle with Marco in the middle. That could be a show, couldn't it? Marco in the middle. Nah, someone's probably done something like that before. Anyway, it doesn't take long for the Z-Space transponder to come into its full effectiveness. And it is in book 46. The council... I swung my stalk eyes toward the small laptop in one corner of my scoop. A new model Apple computer I had acquired at Computer City. With the help of several months of Rachel's credit card allowance. I believe that was a snippet of a Yeerk dialogue, I explained finally. I have applied a computer program of my own making to the zero-space transponder I created, with help from your father, Marco. Again, the Council at 13 commenced Mr. 2 on his proposed plan, which I have designated Operation 9466, Phase 1, pending final approval from Visit 1, the Council orders Visit to proceed. Axe adds a new item to his collection, so not only has he got the lime green iMac, but he's also now picked up an Apple laptop. Well done, Axe, good stuff, and he uses that to basically add to the zero space transponder so it can speak out these messages. At least that's what I remember from the quote. I'm probably misremembering now, but something like that, so he can hear when things come through. And that is where they hear about the new era of this war on Earth, where Vista 3 is now Vista 1, and it's going to be all-out warfare. And that happens they learn about that right there in Axe's scoop. You're a very important part now, Axe's scoop. That's where you hear that information coming through the zero space transponder found in Axe's scoop. Haha! And by the way, we will cover the zero space transponder in its own separate analysis. I'm not going to go too in depth with that now, so let's just move on, shall we? This next quote comes from book 48. So we talked earlier about this being a dream, but let's see what happens in there anyway, just for completionist's sake. Wow! Marco sat up and stared intently at the screen. Look at this! On the net! And I was their first-person account of an alien attack on a nuclear sub. And here's another one. Some guy who doesn't want to be identified. He says he's a human controller whose Yeerk had joined the resistance. It would seem that the human race is about to learn the truth, Axe said thoughtfully. If the Yeerks no longer feel their presence is a secret, this could be the moment they decide to declare open war. Wahoo! I pumped my fist. Marco shook his head in disgust. Could you at least try to act like you're not thrilled at the prospect? So that is what happens in Rachel's dream sequence, and it basically becomes a bit where Rachel gets all angry, and that propels things in book 48. But that's a complete tangent, nothing that important. And then the last we get of Axe's scoop is quite strange, actually, because his scoop is now in the Hork-Bajir Valley. And it's also now where we see the governor's speech on television, and they watch it in Axe's scoop. We were back home in Axe's scoop in the Hork-Bajir Valley. We were crowded around Axe's TV, watching news footage of last night's battle. The governor shuffled her notes, looked into the camera again. This is not the time for panic, she said. It is the time for each of us to reach into our souls and pull out the courage we may not even know we possess. Our enemy is strong, but we are stronger because we are fighting for our lives and our freedom, for our very existence. Thank you, Governor. The camera switched to Patricia. Axe clicked off the TV. We sat in silence, staring at the blank screen. So that is the last time we see Axe's scoop, and apparently it's just moved. It's now in the Hork-Bajir Valley. Unless it was originally in the Hork-Bajir Valley, which I'm 99.99% certain it is not. Because why would the Hork-Bajir Valley be 2 miles roughly north of Cassie's barn in a clearing? No. So what's happened is somewhere between book 46 and 51, somewhere between those books, Axe has moved his whole scoop from there to the Hork-Bajir Valley. And I imagine it took place after book 49, the diversion where all the animals are basically going into hiding. They all go into hiding. That's probably the point where Axe thought, well, there's no point in me being near Cassie's farm anymore, so I'm going to get up and move my stuff as well. So yeah, I'm suspecting that he moved his scoop in between books 49 and 50. I said it. There. It's canon now, because I said it. The Animorphs universe has declared it so. Said no one ever. But yeah, the last we see of Axe's scoop is that moment where they see the governor of California on TV saying, "This is a Yeerk invasion." And then it's all made rather superfluous and because the next book, it all just like, it's as if it never happened. The California governor, basically everyone just says, "I'll just ignore her, she's wacky." This, California governors is probably not too far from the truth, really. Probably everyone just ignores them anyway. So yeah, that big moment at the end in Axe's scoop wasn't as big as it was probably portrayed to be at the time. But yeah, so Axe's scoop. Portable, it moves around the place a bit, ends up in the Hork-Bajir Valley. I don't imagine he needed the dip in the ground anymore. Well, there's probably a bit of a dip, but it's probably even more makeshift, where it's like just strapped to a bunch of trees, something like that. No, it was probably in an open clearing in the Hork-Bajir Valley, much like this picture here. But there was no need for the secrecy anymore, so it's probably a bit more open, a bit more stuff in it. And that's probably where they held some of their meetings, maybe on a rainy day. But there's little more we can say about Axe's scoop. A worthwhile addition to the series, of course, because it's Axe's home. We don't spend too much time there, but when we do, it is either quite funny or quite important. So yeah, Axe's scoop. Great addition to the series. Thank you very much. Shall we see what's in the next episode of AniLysis, number 99? So what could we potentially have in AniLysis number 99? Well, I've still not gotten down to listen to the audiobook for Elfangor's Secret, so it's anything from book 1 to book 29 and some of the other books in between. So it could be Naomi, it could be Subvisor 19, who I'm pretty sure we've done. So why is that there? Yeah, we've done Subvisor 19. Get out of here. Or it could be Gorks, or Alahar 7865. We don't know. It could be any of these things. There are 726 possibilities. So let's go. Which of the 726 possible AniLysis videos will it be? Broad and Willow. I can tell you what these are because I've only just recently listened to the audiobook for 28. But those are the streets near the animal testing facility. AniLysis number 99, gang. Broad and Willow. Excellent. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you for Broad and Willow somewhere else in the Animals universe. Ta-ra.